I'm now going to hand over, to my colleague Glenda Cox, Dr. Glenda Cox, who will be presenting about digital open textbooks for development, broadening access and supporting curriculum transformation at UCT. I know folks are moving around, and we'll give you about 2 minutes for folks going to other venues, some who have just joined us. And please, those who are just joining us, come sit a bit closer. It's very lonely in the front. Come join us.
Morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Is this working properly? Everybody hear me clearly? Okay, great. This morning I'd like to open up a conversation on digital open textbooks for development. Introduce you to digital open textbooks. Can you hear me? Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Yes. And how they can potentially provide a way of supporting curriculum transformation. And my name's Glenda Cox, and my colleague Michelle Wilmers, co-author, is sitting over there, but I will be doing the presentation today. So just to welcome all of you here at the Teaching and Learning Conference, but also to say hi to any Emerge participants that may be joining online for this session. So the context of this presentation is the struggle for access and social inclusion in higher education. And in recent years, we've seen the emergence of various fallist movements, including Fees Must Fall, and a strong call for decolonization of the curriculum. And this is not only at UCT, as we know, this is across higher education, even more broadly across the global south, but also in the global north, where curriculum need transformation. So it's a huge issue that we're currently all grappling with. So in our South African higher education context, we're looking at what knowledge there is in the curriculum and whose knowledge is it. We're looking at how representative that knowledge is, who's being excluded and excluded, where the gaps are, the silences, the invisibility, who's being marginalized in the curriculum. We want to consider intersectionality in our approaches in the future, and very importantly, our position as curriculum writers, and to claim that position and to state it up front. These are all very key issues that we're all grappling with now in our teaching. And so what I would like to propose is the potential of open education to address two very key dimensions. So the fees must fall, the economic dimension of saving cost through open education. And as the presentation unfolds, you will see how I will make that argument for that and explain what open education is. And then also the roads must fall call, which is a cultural dimension. So what we want to do through open education is to in fact rewrite many of the textbooks and many of the resources with a local voice. And those are the two potential aspects I'd like to thread through this discussion. So a little background on the open movement. I'm not too sure who in the audience is aware of openness and the open movement, so I'm going to show you a few slides to give you a bit of a background. So I'm talking about open education, and open education is part of a much broader open ecosystem. Open access we know about is focused particularly on research, but we also have open data. In the bottom corner, we have open source software, who really pioneered this whole open ecosystem. And in the opposite, in this corner over here, are the Creative Commons licenses. So the Creative Commons licenses have been the key enabler for academics, for people to share their data, share their software. And I'll explain why now. So who's heard of Creative Commons licensing in the room? Just a little show of hands. Okay, quite a few of you, that's wonderful. So what Creative Commons license allows is for the author of materials to put a Creative Commons license on their materials. The author still maintains the copyright and the attribution. However, what it does enable is it enables the users to use the materials in a particular way. So it gives them the right to distribute, to adjust the materials, and to use the materials as they want in their teaching or in their context. So that's what Creative Commons enables, and it's globally recognized, and currently we're looking at around about 2 billion works that are licensed with Creative Commons license. So this is not a small endeavor, this is massive. Then, in our context at UCT, a fundamental enabler is the fact that UCT assigns copyrights to you all as authors of your teaching, of all your scholarly publications. This is not the case in all institutions in South Africa. In fact, only 5 of them do this. And across higher education and other settings, this is a very important enabler. You need to be aware of what your university's copyright policies are. So not only in the Global South, but also in the Global North. So a key provision, but in our context, a key enabler, because you have that right. So I've talked about open education broadly, and now I'm going to kind of hone in on open educational resources. And these are resources, so open content, open educational resources, teaching materials that are mostly discoverable online, and very importantly, openly licensed. So using that Creative Commons license in most cases. And what that license enables is for the materials to be shared and used and improved and redistributed by whoever wants to use them, so freely available. An open education resource can be something as simple as a photograph. It can be a single image that you share with the Creative Commons license. You keep your copyright and your attribution, but you allow people to use it. It can also be texts, course materials, teaching strategies, and also textbooks. So these open education resources have the potential to address 2 key areas of concern for us in the Global South. One is localization. So we often tend to use materials from the Global North without having the local aspect. Having free resources enables us to adapt those resources using local examples, local case studies. And then economically, these materials are free to the user. I've talked about open education, I've talked about open education resources, but the key element that enables all of this is open educational practices. So it's your practices in your classrooms, your open practices, that will encourage you or help you to share your materials in the first place. So this is the kind of stepping stone. And these open practices in your teaching allow you to collaborate with colleagues, co-create with students, and share these materials with other colleagues around the world and students around the world. It also opens up important critique of these materials as a way of quality assurance. So on to specifically now open textbooks. So as we know, the fees must fall call is around fees for higher education, but often the cost of textbooks is extremely inhibiting for students. And this has been a well-researched area at various higher education institutions in South Africa, where students simply cannot afford to buy the textbook, and often that's a reason why they actually don't complete their courses. So 7,000 Rand is the figure that's roughly been calculated by the International Academic Programs Office. So that's quite a substantial amount of money per semester. And if we look at our traditional models of textbook provision, under full copyright, we have print materials and we have digital materials, e-textbooks at the moment. But they're under full copyright and very expensive. And the other side of this diagram is print open textbooks as well as digital open textbooks using an open license, and therefore enabling the user to use them and providing materials that are free or of minimal cost to the user. So what are open textbooks? Openly licensed material, I've mentioned already. These textbooks can be published in formats that facilitate integration of multimedia, so they can enable quite interesting apps and multimedia to be actually incorporated into the textbooks that we couldn't necessarily do in the print form. They can be comprised of particular elements that might be useful for the user, not perhaps the entire textbook, but chapters or aspects of chapters. So they allow a lot of flexibility in the technical side of creating these textbooks. And these can be legally hosted on websites and repositories and printed and redistributed because of the open license. So these open textbooks can be created from scratch, but they can also be a textbook that exists, that's under an open license, that an academic takes and adapts for the local conditions. So again, that localized approach is really something very important for us. So where can you find existing open textbooks? There are a number of different sites. I must mention that most of these are not from the Global South, with the exception of Siyavula, right in the middle. And Siyavula is a local organization, and they provide textbooks for basic education. And the others are all a mishmash of higher education and schooling education. I want to highlight just one particular example because I'm going to carry that thread through, and that's OpenStax. So these textbooks are freely available, and they have been used across the globe. And they are used as is if you want a free textbook, or you can adapt them. So what's happening at UCT currently? We already have early adopters who are pioneering this work in open textbooks. And Johan Fagan is a leader in this area. He has been recognized internationally for this particular textbook. And this textbook is, in fact, a collaboration of multiple authors. And it's downloaded every 90 seconds. So he saw a real need for a free textbook in this particular area of speciality. And he went ahead and did this kind of on his own steam, in his own time, and got his fellow authors to create this textbook. And there are other examples. I'm not going to go into all of them. These are all available on OpenUCT and freely available. And then just an example of a physics course that are, in fact, the prescribed textbook is, in fact, one of those OpenStax textbooks. So these are being used a little bit at UCT, still beginning stages, but people are actually realizing the value of these textbooks and the fact that they are free. And some people really need to have a free textbook. So now I would like to introduce a new project that will be hosted in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching, the Digital Open Textbooks for Development Project, or as we would like to call it, DOT4D. So hopefully you'll remember that because we think it's quite catchy. So this project is funded by the International Development for Research Centre, the IDRC, from Canada. And it starts kind of right about now, actually, and will go along until December 2020. And it's hosted here at UCT. So it's a UCT project, and although our context is here and our support will be here at UCT, we will hopefully also collaborate with regional and national stakeholders who are interested in open textbooks. So the project general objective is to contribute to improving inclusion in South African higher education by addressing equitable access to appropriate and relevant learning resources. And we have 3 key objectives around that. We want to look at what's happening at the moment with these open textbooks. So I gave you some examples of open textbooks, but we want to really understand how those academics have created those textbooks, what the models are for textbooks that currently exist, and then we're going to be supporting open textbook publishing activity here at UCT, specifically with strategies around integrating student perspective, curriculum transformation, and sustainability. And then those 2 objectives kind of feed into what we'd like to see around policy development initiatives, more broadly both at UCT but also nationally around open textbooks. So just in summary, we have 3 main activities. The first one is research-based, in-depth case studies of very different models of creating open textbooks. Then we will be having grants for UCT academics to create digital open textbooks. You may already have materials that you would like to adapt, or you have a textbook in mind that's an open resource that you would like to adapt. These grants will be advertised shortly. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we're considering an intersectional approach where we're looking at gender, different disciplines. We're very keen for collaboration on these textbooks and very keen for student co-creation. And these 2 activities will feed into kind of impact events where we'd like to get regional universities involved and interested in this conversation, involved in the conversation, and learn what we're doing here at UCT, as well as national stakeholders, including government, key government members who are interested and also moving ahead with this idea of open textbooks. So I'd like to suggest that we can open up to include student voices. We can open up to include marginalized voices. And we can open up to create new knowledge that is transformative, representative, and localized. And then just a little advert, the .4D call for grants will come out sometime in September. So please look out for that, and please talk to me afterwards if you're interested at all in digital open textbooks, or my colleague Michelle. That's pretty much all I had to say. We also have, before this project, we had a very big project in SALT called Research for OER for Development, and we actually have these books that are freely available. So anyone who's interested in open education across the Global South, we have some wonderful case studies in here about the research that we did. And that's all for me. Thank you. Questions?
The university has a blanket Dalro copyright agreement, which means that regardless of whether you use open materials for courses or not, you still pay for that as part of the course. And not university, what I'm saying is the faculties are being asked to pay for that, or the administration is paying for the DALRO license.
Copywritten materials, but not open materials.
For open materials, it's based on course enrollments, it's not based on open materials. So, for example, Tony Carr has a course online.
Yes, facilitating online.
That is still subject to copyright charges by the university. It's a short course. Yeah, it is. Corinne van Heerden has confirmed that with me. Okay. So I'm just saying, what I suppose I'm raising is things are changing, and we need to now bring our administrative and legal agreements in, put them in line with this, because to charge a fully online and open-resourced course doesn't make sense that these courses are going to be charged because we have this blanket agreement with a copyright company. So it's just something to flag for the future and needs to be taken up and clarified.
Okay.
Yeah, I co-convene that course with Tony, and the entire course site as well as the course leaders guide are OERs. So if they're charging, okay, so we'll definitely consider that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. It's great. That's part of the project, is to actually understand the whole ecosystem of open textbooks and how we can make a difference. Great. Thank you.
Oh, Glenda, over here.
There you are. Sorry, I'm looking because I can see someone.
So, I don't know. I have a question around the distinction between the global north and the global south.
Okay.
In terms of the framing of the material. So is that where the publishing house is located, the voices that are used in the textbook?
Yeah.
So
for me, I'm using it as an example of curriculum that aren't relevant for us. So it's a global north voice, and we're not getting enough voices from the south. So we're not actually localizing and getting our view out there. And that's the distinction. Publishing houses are everywhere. And it's often that global north textbook that's supposedly the one with the most expertise, so it's the one that's used. And I'm suggesting we start rethinking that model.
So when we frame it as a global north textbook, we're talking about the authors and the knowledge makers that are used in the production of the textbook itself.
Thanks. Just a quick question for clarification, but the previous comment question just to comment on the danger of a binary worldview, which is being tackled at the moment in global discourse. It's quite outdated by the facts of development. But my question for clarification is on the .4D, you had 3 criteria that you're trying to frame this around, and maybe you can just go back on the slide. But the third one of those was sustainability. I just really wanted to clarify in what sense that word was being used in your .4D project.
So if you were considering looking at at creating an open textbook, one of the things that we feel that's very important is that if you're creating something, you are also considering versions and updating and keeping that material up to date, which you can do. That's the power of having a digital textbook, is you can add to that with new information. You can edit it. And that was one of the things that we want people to consider, sort of ways of moving forward and keeping the material up to date. So that's how we were considering sustainability. These are all things we need to fine-tune at the point. That's something that we thought was crucial, this idea of sustainability.
Quite a different sense to what I was thinking.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Veronica. Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thanks.